Hi everyone, Jessica here from Paper Ink Stamp and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video we're going to be looking at issue 80 of Die Cutting Essentials magazine. This month we have got a 4-piece die set. This is by Card Making Magic. So this is called Peony Panel. So we do, as I said, have 4 dies in here. So we've got the actual panel itself with those peony flowers, and then we've got this sort of crisscross style background. We've then got a die to actually cut that panel out. So this doesn't have a cutting edge, so this will remain in your piece of cardstock that you do die cut it from. If you want to trim it out and have a little bit of a stitched border detail on here as well, then you can use this die here. Then we do have a rectangle, like a banner down here. You could use for lots of different sentiments, but in here we do have a beautiful script sentiment in here, and this says "Send in love." So that's the free gift with this magazine. Let's just take a quick look, as always, at the inspiration in the magazine itself for using this die set. So the first pieces of inspiration we've got making some actual items, some gifts. So we've got decorating a birdhouse here, we've got a circle card, we've got creating bags in here, lanterns. So again, really versatile. You can use it for lots of different things and loads of different techniques that you can do using a panel like this. So we've got some more projects here using some of the downloadable papers. So this is Pretty in Pink. So you can see the papers just down here following that kind of floral peony pink theme. So again, different ways of using your die. You can snip into it, so you can just use some of the flowers. Again, we have got different kind of sentiments in here. So these are going to be the SVG sentiments. So we've got happy birthday, best wishes, get well soon. So if you do have a cutting machine that does take SVG files, then you'll be able to die cut these sentiments. But again, we've got some basic paper piece in here, and say just sort of snipping those apart and kind of just using the bits and pieces that you want. So let's take a quick look at what comes included in the next Die Cutting Essentials magazine. So this goes on sale the 9th of September, and we have a 10-piece die set here. This is called Autumn Wishes. So this is going to work with the other magazines that have got autumn themed stamps and dies and things with those. So here we have got sentiments. We've got blessed and thankful. We've got some really lovely sort of corner autumn inspired pieces here. So lots of kind of foliage. We've got a pumpkin, we've got a couple of leaves, berries and an acorn, and again just a few more leaves up here. Again, there is going to be 8 papers that you can download and just some idea of what you're going to be able to create. So that was a little look at the magazine and our Peony Panel. So now let's get into creating today's project. So today's projects, we're going to be creating some tags. So there's lots of inspiration on how to use this die set to create cards and different kind of projects. And I wanted to create something different again. So what I've got here is the Lawn Fawn Tag Your It die set. So this came with part of the Lawn Fawn bundle that I won from the Card Maker of the Year competition. And you've got this really lovely big tag in here. So this is a really great size tag because it's big enough to allow us to get quite a bit of this panel detailing on here, which of course that's what we want to be able to see. So for our first tag, we're going to be using our panel like a stencil. So I've simply die cut this from some white cardstock. This was just some scrap stuff. And you can see how there's no cut edge. So this is going to stay attached in your cardstock. So I die cut this panel from my Gemini die cutter machine, and let me just show you the combination of plates that I used, and literally all of the pieces just simply fell out of here. So I've got my base plate, I have got my plastic shim, I've got my magnetic shim, and what I have been doing recently is just putting in a scrap piece of paper. So this is just an 80 GSM paper that you would just pop into the printer, and what I find with this is I don't get any impressions from any previous die cuts on my cardstock. So you can see my plates are very well used. They are etched quite a bit in here, and sometimes if I'm die cutting, I find that it leaves an imprint on my my cardstock, which I really don't want to do. So I have found that just putting in a piece of thin paper really does help to stop that from happening. So I will put my die in here face up, so my die cuts into my plate, and that just really works for me. But if you do have any trouble with kind of the impressions going onto your cardstock, I would recommend just putting a thin piece of paper in there and see if that helps. So to create my tags today, I'm going to be using some thicker card, and this is where I can really dive into all of my scraps. Because this die, you know, isn't huge, I don't need a big piece of paper. I don't need to get a new piece out. I can use all of these. So this is a combination of my Ink Me cardstock from Hunky Dory, which is 300 GSM. This is kind of cut-offs from card blanks that I've cut down. So, you know, this is going to be sort of thicker because we are creating a tag today. Of course, I want to use a thicker cardstock, but this is a really great way then of using up some of your scraps that you might have, because, you know, they could all be kind of the perfect size. So what I'm going to do is just pop down my stencil. I'm going to take just a little bit of washi tape just to hold this down. But we are going to be super careful with this, again, because this is just kind of thin cardstock, you know, we do kind of want to be careful. So for this first one, I'm going to be using the shaded lilac from Distress Oxide range, and I've got a blending brush here. So I'm going to go just right on the edge of my brush here, and I want to just try as best as I can to stay, you know, within those peonies. And I'm just going to do this really, really lightly because I don't want this stencil to kind of move around too much. So if you do like the idea of using this as a stencil, you could die cut this from something a little bit more permanent. So you could get some plastic and die cut it from that, you know, and you can just sort of use that over and over again. So I'm just trying to stay kind of within that flower. I'm not kind of too worried if I go outside that. I'm not sort of too worried if I don't pick up all of the sections on that, but I just want to get sort of the main sort of bits of it. So I'm going to come in with this smaller one up here, and the way this is going to blend out is it's just going to give us a really nice kind of feathered look in some areas. So we've got then just a smaller flower here. Of course, if you do have any smaller blending brushes, that would probably be easier. These are the blending brushes I use for my oxide. You can see that they are sort of slightly bigger. I do have my finger daubers, but they are only for my dye inks, not my distress inks. But that application would certainly make this process probably a little bit easier because it is, of course, smaller. Okay, so there we have our flowers done. Okay, so next I'm going to come in with a little bit of Twisted Citron, and this is then going to be for my sort of leaves on here. So again, let's just go in with the very tip of this. And we can kind of overlap those colours a little bit if you can. But again, I'm not sort of looking for anything too perfect here. So I've missed just a few leaves in there, so I'm just going to come back. Otherwise we'd have kind of a floating leaf there. So we've got just a leaf up there. I'm in with a little bit of sponge sugar. What I've just done is wiped off my shaded lilac just on a piece of scrap cardstock, just so I don't kind of mix those colours in together too much. And then we're just going to ink up that background. So we don't actually need to sort of stencil through the whole of this, because we are going to be just die cutting this to become our tag. But you know, you could use the offcuts for something else if you wanted to. So I'm just going to try and sort of come in to the section sort of in between. Okay, so there we have our stenciling done. So let's pull up our stencil, and you can see really how beautiful that is. So there's just a close-up look of that stencil, and so you can see just how easy that was. Of course, this is going to work with any of your ink pads. You don't have to use the Distress Oxides. You could use your dyes, pigments, whatever it is that you have. But just by simply die cutting that from some basic white cardstock, you know, you can create something really beautiful. And that's the same for any of your dyes. You know, you can turn them into stencils. So all we've got left to do for this tag now is literally just to die cut the tag element from it. So all we need to do is kind of work out how we want to frame this. So I'm happy with that placement. I'm just going to hold this down with some washi tape and run this through my die cutting machine. So there's our first tag. I really love how this has come out. I love the placement of those sort of flowers, and then the fact that we've still got some of those green leaves in there and a little bit of that background. You don't just have to use this as a tag for like a gift bag or a present, whatever. You know, you could use this in journaling, scrapbooking. You could pop this onto a card as like a main focal point, but I just really love how this looks. And I think those colours sort of work together really beautifully. So there's our first tag using our Peony Panel die to create a stencil. So for our next tag, we're going to be still using the stencil, and it's just a different way then of not just having to ink blend through it. So we're actually going to do a little bit of heat embossing. So I have die cut myself a new panel. The only reason I've done this is because I used my Distress Oxides. I didn't want anything to kind of transfer onto my tag. So I've die cut that again, and I'm going to be using just some Simon Says Stamp Clear Embossing ink, and I've got my embossing blending brush as well, so I literally just use this for some clear inks. I'm actually going to be just embossing this with one colour of embossing powder. You could go in if you wanted to and do like we did with the ink blending and just kind of heat emboss one, you know, the flowers, and just sort of doing one of those elements at a time, but I'm literally just going to do it all the same. I'm going to use this copper here. This is just going to make it a little bit easier, but again, I just want to sort of go for slightly different looks for each of these tags. So I don't want all of them to be kind of exactly the same. So I want to use sort of different sections of it. I don't want them all to be, you know, that same piece, which is just going to be like this panel here. So I'm mainly going to concentrate on sort of this right hand side of our panel. So we've got those flowers, but we have sort of more of this detail up here. So I'm really carefully just going to ink blend. Again, this is some of my scrap cardstock, perfect for creating tags because it's slightly thicker. And I'm just really as carefully as I can over these sort of more delicate sections, and kind of dab it in rather than go around in a circular motion. I'm going to bring in just a scrap piece of cardstock just to gather all of our extra embossing powder. So I'm just going to lay that to one side for the moment because I am going to try and do a second layer on here, but now I'm just going to go ahead and heat set this. So there's our heat embossed panel, and how absolutely gorgeous is that, again in that copper. Maybe like a rose gold would be really nice in this as well, but I do have a few areas where I do have just some stray embossing powder. I didn't use my anti-static powder bag, and I really should have, just so I could get that really beautiful kind of clean look. So what I'm going to try and do is pop our stencil kind of back over our design, and we're just going to kind of go in again, mainly over our flowers here, because I want to try and just get a little bit more sort of raised definition, just to kind of bring those sections up off that background, since we have just only used one embossing colour. So let's just come in. So we're going to have sort of a few sections where it is going to come up outside of those flowers, but that's okay. Let's just kind of press that ink nice on top of our first layer, and we'll sort of see how this comes out. So now I'm just going to sprinkle this over again. So it's just going to kind of pick it up in some of those areas. So I've just knocked off some embossing powder from some areas I didn't want it, and now I'm going to heat set this again. Okay, so here is our finished embossed panel. So what I actually did was did this for a third time again, exactly the same. So it's got 3 layers over those flowers of embossing powder, and hopefully you can see sort of how much the flowers stand away from that background. So those flowers are a lot smoother than the background is because we have those 3 layers of embossing powder on there. But I actually think it just gives it a much nicer look by doing it just a few times. It really does make all the difference. So if you haven't tried heat embossing and sort of layering it up a few times, I really urge you to have a go because it does just create some really beautiful effects. So I'm just going to leave this to sit just for a second before I run it through my die cutting machine with the tag. But what I wanted to do was just bring this little guy back into play. Is I'm just going to kind of come in over this again, and we can actually just heat emboss this panel itself, and this is going to look really beautiful because it is going to have all of that sort of definition on there. So you're almost getting sort of 2 for the price of 1 here. So let's go for a slightly different look. So I'm going to pick out, this is the black sparkle, so this has got glitter within this black embossing powder. So let's just sprinkle this all over our panel. So we've got a nice coverage of that. So again, I'm just gonna move that to one side and I'm gonna heat set this here. So I've just heat set that, and if I just pop a piece of white card behind that, you can see so beautiful. So we can trim this out, you know, we can trim sort of the edges out, but hopefully if I just move it in the light, you'll be able to kind of see all of that sparkle in there as well. So again, just another way, if you are using it as a stencil, even this stencil that we created here, you know, I could still cut this down and use that panel as well, because we do have that beautiful colour on there. But again, you know, it's not just what you're creating, so you know, your piece that you have stenciled, think about how you can actually use then that stencil as well. So I've just run this tag through, so because of that sort of heat embossing, it has sort of curled up just a tiny bit, but again, I just think that's so beautiful, and with that sort of raised different feel to the flowers where we've sort of triple embossed that, it just stands out so beautifully from the background. So for our next tag, we're going to do some dry embossing. So we've done some heat embossing with embossing powder. Now we're going to have a go at dry embossing. So dry embossing is basically taking a die and just embossing it like an embossing folder onto your cardstock. So my plate combination for dry embossing with this particular die could be different for different dies. It could be different for you and different machines and things. So just have a play and see what works best for you. But so the combination I've got here on top is a clear plate. I've got my magnetic shim. I've got my scrap piece of cardstock. I needed kind of an extra shim in there as well. So I've got literally just 2 pieces of paper just folded over. So that's sort of 4 thick. Then I had my panel in there, so the die was facing up on my cardstock. Then I had my sort of purple rubber mat, and then my second cutting plate underneath. So that's what I found worked sort of best for me. And then for this dry embossing, if we just take off our panel, so this hasn't sort of etched too deep into it. Obviously you don't want it to pierce the back. The idea is that it's just almost embossing it like it were an embossing folder. But again, so I'm happy with how this has sort of turned out. We've got that impression really nicely on there. If I just bring it up a little higher so you can see. If I just sort of tip it, hopefully you can see that design in there. So like I said, it's like using an embossing folder. It's not kind of raised it too much like you would get necessarily with an embossing folder, but again, it's got that design in there. So there's lots of things you could do with this panel now. You can treat it like you would any other embossing folder. You could add some inks to it, you could colour it in, whatever it is you want to do. But I actually want to create quite a simple tag for this one. And I'm actually just going to leave it as it is. So we're going to slightly finish these tags at the end of the video. So I'm going to keep this one quite plain, just as it is. So we've got that dry embossing, and I'm simply just going to cut this out now with our tag die. So let's pop this tag out, and there you have it. So again, a real sort of simple tag, but again, you have that really beautiful sort of embossed design in there as well. So again, we're going for sort of very different looks here for these tags. So for my next tag, what I was going to do was simply die cut this from some coloured cardstock, and we were just going to use this and just place it over the top, so you've got then a coloured panel with that white underneath. But what I actually thought would be cool is just to use these offcut pieces. So we've got this really beautiful piece here with that colouring on. Of course, then we have got our black sparkle heat embossed panel. So I thought it would look really cool to just offset this slightly, so then you have that black sort of outline on top, but then you have that hint of colour underneath. So if I just lay that down, I'm hoping you're going to be able to kind of see how pretty this is going to look. And for this one, I was going to snip into the panel itself. So again, really great snippability. There's some great examples in the magazine of how you can snip into this. So I think I kind of really want to go right to the edge and keep, you know, as much of this kind of foliage here as possible. So again, I'm literally just gonna cut into this, and I'm gonna take that side panel out, and then I'm just gonna basically take off most of this background. Okay, so I've literally just snipped out that background. I can tidy this up once it's actually on our tag here, so I don't want to kind of break it off sort of too much. So to adhere this down, what I'm going to do is just pop this onto a piece of scrap cardstock, and I'm going to take my dotty tape pen, and I'm just really carefully going to add adhesive over this. So again, I'm just being really careful not to wreck any sort of sections of this. So now I've got my adhesive on there, I can just go ahead and pop this over my tag. So there we have sort of that section there, and now all I'm going to do is just cut this piece out exactly the same as I've done with this one. So I've cut out my black panel as well, and I've done the same thing, added some of my dotty tape pen just to the back of that. And what we're going to do now is simply overlay this, but just where it gives us a beautiful coloured drop shadow. So I'm just going to kind of manipulate this and just sort of move it around until I get sort of all of that colour that I really want you to be able to see. Okay, so now we have both of those together, we can just go ahead and just sort of trim off all of this excess here. Okay, so I've just trimmed that down. So if I just hold that up to the camera, and hopefully you'll be able to see, so we've got that drop shadow there with that colour, and then we've got that black sparkly outline just on top. So again, just using the wastage there, it's created a really beautiful effect. I really love how this has come out. You could of course put that onto some coloured card if you wanted to, but yeah, I really love just how that looks. So for my fifth and final tag, I wanted to create a background, and then we're going to die cut our panel and lay it over top. I've got a few different shades of red here, and I found this piece of sort of gold glitter as well. I thought that would be really beautiful together. I'm going to grab my paper trimmer, and I'm going to trim this down to be kind of a 1/4 inch strips here. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of these scraps here. These are 1/4 inch thick, sort of roughly. I'm not sort of too worried about it being perfect, but yeah, we've got a handful of sort of different red shades in here. So I'm gonna grab a piece of cardstock here. So let's grab a tape runner. So I did get a bundle through the post the other day of sticks to anything. So we've got tape runners, I've got some sort of like liquid glue, there's some red liner tape, there's foam squares. There was tons of stuff in here. So you'll be seeing me use this stick to anything products a little bit more often. So now I've added my adhesive, I'm gonna go ahead and just start adding my strips. So I'm gonna kind of do it at a diagonal. And I'm just gonna work kind of at either side. I'm just gonna buddy this up as close as possible. So again, this is a really great way of using up any scrap cardstock that you have. I've recently just gone through my scraps, and I just had so much there that I just thought I'm never ever gonna actually use it. So definitely using it for projects like this is going to use it up brilliantly. So I'm trying to go in some sort of order colour wise here. So let's just go in with a light piece of red, and then I'm going to go back in then with that gold. And I'm just going to keep repeating this until I've kind of filled up this whole section. So I've got a few strips left over. But we've got a nice sort of big section here that we can die cut from. So let's just line this up. So I'm going to go sort of round about there, and then I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine. Okay, so now we can take out our tag die here nice and carefully. There, I mean, that's just such a beautiful tag in itself. If you've got scrap cardstock, you want to make maybe some Christmas tags. Yeah, I think that's so, so beautiful. So I have already passed through my panel as well. And I left all the pieces in just so you can kind of see just how well this all just absolutely falls out. So I've got my panel, and I'm just going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm just going to take my dotty tape pen, and I'm just going to run this all over that background. And I'm just going to place that down again. I'm just looking at the position. So we want some of those flowers on there. We want a little bit of that background as well. So now I've got my panel on there. All I need to do now is literally just trim this down. And there is our last tag. So you can see I've just trimmed that all the way around, and it's then just got that really beautiful background with that overlay of our panel on top. We've got a little bit of that background in there as well. But I really love how this has come out. It's something just a little bit different again. And again, you can use then your scraps up as well. So here is a look at our tags all finished. So you can see that I've just added some sentiments, some Nuvo drops and some ribbon onto here as well. And I love how they've all come out. I love that we've literally used one dye, just one product, and we've got such different results from it. So starting with this one, I didn't actually do anything to this one. I simply just added some gold ribbon to the top. I thought it was quite busy already. I was going to add a sentiment, but I kind of felt like maybe it would get a little bit lost. So to be honest, I just left it. You don't have to put a sentiment on it. You know, that could literally just be the tag, and you can just write on the back. So for this one here, this is our ink blended background. So we took that panel and created a stencil. So I just used the Funky Fossil Thank You die that I got. So this is one long sentiment, but I just cut this down just so it would actually fit on the tag. And I love how the thank is sort of coming on and off that tag. And I've just added some clear Nuvo drops to that as well, and then added the ribbon to the top. And I really love how this one's come out. That black really helps stand out from that background, but I absolutely just love how this has ink blended. So for this tag here, this was our dry embossed tag. So we just used that panel to just emboss that detail into our tag. And I wanted to keep it fairly simple. So I just used that Sending Love sentiment die that came with the magazine. I die cut that from that same gold glitter cardstock we used to create this background here. And I've just attached that. And then I found just a love heart die from my stash. And I actually die cut that from the leftover scraps we had from creating this background here, and I just thought that worked so nicely. I thought Sending Love, it really just needed that love heart. I've added some black ebony Nuvo drops, and then just added that ribbon as well. I've done one too many dots, so I think this one here is a little bit of an odd placement, but overall I am happy with how this one looks. Again, you don't always have to have your panel like standing out and really be in the main focus. You can have it to be really subtle in the background. So for this tag here, this was using our scraps from these two stencil tags here. So I just laid over and created a drop shadow with that coloured one from this tag here, and then where we heat embossed with some of that black sparkle embossing powder, it's created a really beautiful outline. I used then for this sentiment and this sentiment here, it was a stamp set from Lisa Horton. It's called Just Saying Collection, and I really love how these are. So where you stamp it is actually where it's solid, and then the sentiment stays white. So I did stamp this in the spun sugar because I did use that colour to stencil our background for this tag. You couldn't see too much of it on here, but I still thought it worked really nicely. And then I just added some purple Nuvo drops. I think this was the Wisteria purple, I think it was, and again just added some black ribbon to the top of that as well. And I really love all of these with the black. I did run out of the black, that's why this one is in the gold, but it still goes nicely with that tag itself. I think this would look even nicer with some black twine, so I think that's definitely a product that I'm going to have a look at getting. Just, it makes it a lot nicer. I would have liked to have done some bows for my tags instead of these. I thought it would look a little bit bulky using this thicker ribbon, but again, I'm happy with how they turned out. And then for our last tag, this was our heat embossed tag. So we stenciled through our panel and just heat embossed that with some copper embossing powder. We did it 3 times over our flowers just to help that stand out. And again, then I just used one of those happy birthday stamps from that same Lisa Horton stamp like this one. I stamped this in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I just added some white Nuvo drops just to help finish that one off. So I really love how these have turned out. It's nice to kind of do something a little bit different, not always just create a card. We know we can create cards with these panels, but you know, thinking about what else that you can create. So again, you know, you could use these for scrapbooking, journaling, actually putting onto cards. That would still look really beautiful. But I'm so happy with how these have turned out. And I love that each one is just slightly different. So it just shows that you can create some really different looks with that single product. So that's going to be it for this video. So if you do like these tags and you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do so you don't miss out on any future videos. So that's it for today. Thanks very much for watching, and happy crafting.